Good morning. It's Friday, April 25th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 567 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Some big news out of the Department of Justice overnight. UNRWA, the UN agency that partnered with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, has been stripped of its immunity. That's good news in the legal and financial fights against Hamas. Meanwhile, the Israelis just got a bunch of F-35s delivered from the United States to the Nevatim air base. That's more firepower that can be deployed against Iran and its proxies. That's the good news. But there was also some tough news out of Gaza yesterday. One Israeli soldier was killed and 3 others were wounded. Hamas continues to maintain the ability to kill and injure Israelis, even as the group steadily loses strength. The debate continues about the wisdom of a continued war. But it's clear to me that Israel does not want to give even a whiff of weakness in Gaza. The lessons of 10-7 must be clear to the region. I suppose we'll see whether those lessons are learned. Our guest today is Rachel Gur, a lecturer at the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy, and Strategy at Israel's Reichman University. She's also the producer of the Ask Haviv Anything podcast, featuring her husband and one-time guest of this program, Haviv Gur. Previously, Rachel served as deputy CEO of Lobby 99, a grassroots nonprofit working to advance the socioeconomic interests of the Israeli public. Rachel and I will dive into the economic situation in Israel after a year and a half of war. So stick around. Our conversation is coming your way momentarily. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan took an extraordinary step on Monday. After breaking up a terrorist cell that was planning attacks in the country, the kingdom outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood and froze all of its assets. This was big for Jordan. The government has long tolerated the Muslim Brotherhood. It even granted the group political participation through a party known as the Islamic Action Front. The idea was that even Islamist groups could be loyal to the crown. I guess that's the end of that experiment. As an observer of the Brotherhood over the years, I've long advocated for tougher policies against the group. After all, the Brotherhood's ideology has been the launchpad for multiple violent jihadi groups across the Middle East. That includes Hamas, al-Qaeda, and ISIS, to name a few. Jordan's big move is a wake-up call. It's time for the White House to start assessing the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood here in America and across the Middle East. But I also must warn, one size does not fit all. Not all the branches of this global network will qualify as terror groups, at least by American standards. The one in Yemen is violent. Apparently, so is the one in Jordan. But Morocco's Muslim Brotherhood may be more moderate, and so on and so forth. Like it or not, the war on terror continues, and the Muslim Brotherhood is an engine of the hate-filled ideology we're fighting. Jordan now sees that clearly. It's probably time for America to start making some similar moves. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the Palestinian Liberation Organization's Central Council held a two-day meeting this week. I point this out for 2 reasons. First, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas had some choice words for Hamas. The octogenarian autocrat called on Hamas to disarm, release the hostages, and surrender control of Gaza. He called his Hamas rivals sons of dogs, and he blamed them for giving Israel pretext to continue the war. Here's the second interesting tidbit. Yesterday, the PLO Central Council announced the creation of a vice presidency. Whoever fills that post will also serve as the vice chairman of the PLO Executive Committee. Abbas is going to pick his VP from the 15-member PLO Executive Council. Keep an eye on this, folks, because the vice president is probably going to be the front runner to succeed Abu Mazen whenever that Altacocker finally kicks the bucket. And yes, I did just call the chairman of the Palestinian government an Altacocker. It's my show, after all. This is just one of the perks. Headline 2, Iran may be operating a new deeply buried tunnel and an expanded security perimeter near the Natanz nuclear site. On Wednesday, the Institute for Science and International Security, also known as the Good ISIS, published satellite images of the new installations. Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, subsequently told reporters that he asked Iran for clarification about the facilities. And now for the kicker. What was Tehran's answer? It's none of your business. Of course, Grossi is the IAE point man for inspection. So yeah, I think it very much is his business. But yeah, nothing to see here as the Trump administration continues to move forward with nuclear diplomacy. A round of technical talks are expected to happen this weekend. For the record, I don't like where any of this is going. Headline 3, Interim Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, says he is open to normalizing ties with Israel. Of course, it all makes sense now. The man does rock a Theodore Herzl beard, or maybe not. Maybe he just likes Sacha Baron Cohen in The Dictator. Either way, there may be something to this story. U.S. Representatives Corey Mills and Marlon Stutzman met with the Syrian leader. They were the first American lawmakers to visit Syria since Assad's fall in December. And apparently, al-Jawlani told them he would consider joining the Abraham Accords under the right conditions. Mills spoke with al-Sharaa for about 90 minutes. They talked about U.S. sanctions, including the conditions that Damascus needs to meet in order to start feeling some sanctions relief. And for what's next, well, Mills said that he plans to bring President Trump a letter from al-Jawlani and brief National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. By the way, al-Sharaa also just gave an interview to the New York Times the other day. I'm not going to go as far as to recommend it, but I will say this. It's instructive. It's a puff piece, and it's unclear who's cheering for al-Qaeda to complete its takeover of Syria more, Jawlani or the New York Times writers. All right. It's time for my conversation now with Rachel Gur of Reichman University in Israel. We'll talk about the war on this show a lot. We do, but we don't often dig into the ways it has impacted Israel domestically. Rachel is the perfect person to help us understand how Israelis are faring socioeconomically after 18 months of conflict, the successes and the challenges of the country's robust political system, and much more. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Rachel Gur.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. All right. Well, good afternoon to you in Israel, actually. Let's start with the good news on the economic front. I hear the fundamentals are actually quite solid, are they not?
Yes, the Israeli economy, and that's not accidental, that's something that's been worked on, hasn't really undergone, despite enormous geopolitical turmoil, both in the political and the economic arena, hasn't really undergone let's say, a bad period or a full recession since 2002, 2003. And so, yes, the Israeli economy, even in the last year, in 2024, grew by about 1%, which is a low number for Israel, but an incredible number, considering, the many setbacks and obviously the enormous amount of resources that were funneled towards the war. The OECD numbers project growth for about 3.5% for 2025. 5.5 for 2026, and obviously the Israeli numbers for the Ministry of Treasury and the Bank of Israel are even higher than that. So the macroeconomics are good. Yes.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. But now I think we should probably talk about the economic toll, the cost of calling up the reservists and keeping them deployed. That's not cheap. Neither are the weapons, the offensive and defensive advanced weapons that Israel buys from the United States or produces on its own. They cost a small fortune. And it goes deeper than that, right? I mean, there's lots of other things that we're tracking right now that are obviously hurting Israel's bottom line. So let's talk about some of those.
It's true. If you look at Israel's expenditure on the military, right? If you look at government expenditure, so it's about 6 to 6.5%, which is obviously higher than, well, almost any other democracy, perhaps except for the United States. But if you look at the whole number, as in how much the war costs us, how much it costs to rehabilitate wounded soldiers, how much it costs to build safe rooms, how much it costs to make sure that emergency supplies are on hand at any given moment, we're looking at closer to 15% of the Israeli GDP. So it's a large, large chunk. If you think of work hours, right? We're talking about reservists, work hours that are lost to the individual, to the company. And those numbers aren't new. Obviously, they've spiked during the war, but they were true to a large extent also beforehand. There is an enormous amount of the Israeli economy that is funneled towards the war effort, and that's all the more, much more so now. There is a huge personal toll to the reservists, and I think that is a toll. I mean, I have two brothers who are actively in the reserves, One brother, his first daughter, his first child, was born when he was in Gaza. She turned 1 when he was in Lebanon. And now she is, she's going to closing in on her second birthday. She's about 1.5. And it's not clear yet, when he or my other brother, right? They're both in their late 20s, early 30s. So that's the classic reserve age, when they will ever come home for good. So yes, the personal toll is huge, but the macroeconomic numbers on the whole are still good. Unemployment is at a record low. So yes, the individuals are paying a very high price, but the Israeli economy has proved that we can both produce and make war at the same time.
Remarkable. And remarkable, I think, in light of some of the challenges, the sort of headwinds that you face. And I want to talk about one of them here. And it's controversial, right? There's a lot of talk about the ultra-Orthodox and what they contribute or don't contribute to the Israeli military and to the Israeli economy. It really does feel like Israel is just missing a big chunk of the human capital that it can deploy either in the service of fighting a war or in the service of the broader economy. Am I wrong here?
You are exactly and utterly correct. Our great Achilles heel, our great source of strength, but also our great Achilles heel is our human capital. If you look at the whole Trump's tariffs tiff in Israel, obviously, we were upset like everyone else in the world, but in reality, because the Israeli economy is sufficiently diverse, we both sell natural gas, right, and chemicals, but mostly services. Right, we haven't been selling oranges since the 1950s out of Jaffa. Right now, we're selling know-how for the most part, not even products, not even the chips, but how to make the chips. And that is that, and the ability of our people, right, to both serve and to continue to produce in an incredible economy is a testament to our human capital. That is our greatest strength. And yes, we face now a very scary and unknown period, because today 30% of our kindergartners, right, are either Haredi or Arab, and which means quite simply that they aren't learning math or STEM or English to the extent that they would need to continue to develop this miracle of a high-tech economy that we have up until this point. And it is projected that those percentages could rise as high as 50%. I think that's high. I see how the birth rate is falling slowly but surely in many of the Haredi sectors. But even if that hits 40%, okay, by 2050, we have a big, big, big problem, right? We need people who can read English and who can do math in order to create this miracle of a strong economy that can weather incredible booms and busts to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I guess specifically, though, we're talking about the ultra-Orthodox. And I know there have been protests in Israel. When I was just there a couple of weeks ago, I saw one of the protests of folks that were coming out, largely secular people, largely people who have kids that are serving the army or kids themselves that came out into the streets holding these signs. It's a contentious issue, right? I mean, this dates back to the founding of the state. David Ben-Gurion carves out a place for the ultra-Orthodox and basically grants them, because their community was eviscerated by the Holocaust, he gives them an opportunity to study Torah and to continue to be subsidized by the state. And now that is something that maybe is not sustainable any longer, right? So this is a contentious issue inside Israel, is it not?
100%. And I think there was always a lot of contention. First of all, Ben-Gurion, it's important to state, gave that exemption to 400 people at the time. Today, we have tens of thousands, okay, if not more, who are enjoying that exemption in each annual year. The real problem with the exemption actually started after the Likud came to power. Up until in 1977, you still only have about 800 people enjoying that exemption. When we hit the early 80s, it suddenly jumps to the thousands, then to the tens of thousands and onward. So it's actually a relatively modern phenomenon. It's only been going on for the last, not for the full 70 years of the state, 75 years plus of the state, but really for the last 40, 50 years. So that's good in the sense that it is reversible. Another, I think, good thing that we see is that this was always a fault line between the secular and the Haredim. But the people who are spearheading the protests today are those who belong to the religious Zionist subsect of Israeli society, which has been the hardest hit by the war. By far, has lost the most soldiers, has the most wounded, and also has the most, because so many people served. I mean, in the average Israeli a religious Zionist household, and I live in a religious Zionist community, even though I myself am not religious, you'll often see 2 or 3, 4, even 5 members of the same family, right? Because families bring children young, you'll see both the father and the son and the brothers, right? Everybody, you see the entire community emptying out to Gaza. And there's the loss of work, there's a strain on the family, there's the financial price, and there's also the hidden prices. Unfortunately, I think one of our great exports in know-how over the next decade is going to be how to deal with post-trauma on a wide scale. So not all of the prices of the war can be seen immediately, and it's going to take a lot of time, patience, and money to rebuild that. But yes, people are very, very angry. And the anger isn't just the secular, the anger is also from the religious Zionists who traditionally were partners and still are today partners of the Haredim in the government. And that partnership is starting to crack.
And it's interesting to watch, right? I mean, because, I think it shows that, religious people in Israel are not monolithic. They've got different cultures, they've got different interests. And certainly, I think the religious Zionists have, I think, as you suggested, put a lot of skin in the game. But let me pivot to another sector of society, because, when we talk about that human capital, there's one other area where Israel's not deploying human capital, and it's important human capital. It's complicated, though, right? We're talking about the Arab Israeli community. Now, I will say that, I see the ways in which the Arab community serves Israel in other ways. Broke my leg about 2 years ago and was treated by almost entirely Arab doctors in Israel. Right. And we see them in other core sectors in Israel. It's not like they're not being deployed, but they're not being deployed to the military in large numbers, if at all. And that is another source of contention, is it not?
Yes, though I don't think there's the same expectation of the Arab sector to serve. It would be highly encouraged for them to serve in some sort of national service. There's a huge problem in some sections of the Arab world with gun violence, with youth in dropout rates into high schools. So the expectation there is more to serve in some sort of national service capacity where they could be serving in their own communities. And help give back to their own communities and to what has now become national problems. I would note in the education system, and I think you said that's very accurate, that is our human capital, which is, at least I served for a decade in various ministries in government and in the Knesset before going to Lobby 99, and one of them was the Jerusalem ministry. And one of the things that we dealt with there was that in East Jerusalem, they actually don't, students, Palestinian Arab students, they learn the Palestinian curriculum, which means that they can't go to college in Israel. They don't do the matriculation exams. Right? If you don't go to college, your ability to be employed, certainly to enter, the high-tech sector, is minimal. But it's a very tricky political question, right? Because you don't want to force curriculum on communities that might not necessarily want it. And so what we would do is we actually offered a computer lab to any school that would offer the Israeli curriculum in addition to the Palestinian curriculum. And there was huge interest. There's always a gap between the people, right? In this case, the parents who wanted their children to matriculate in the Israeli system for the most part, so that they would have that sort of economic opportunity. And the official leadership that wanted to hold on to the Palestinian curriculum because it is, virulently anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish.
Yeah. Okay, I got one more question for you before we let you go. You've been very generous with your time. Politically, I just want to get a sense of what's happening right now. How is the Israeli system faring? I mean, it feels like the wheels were coming off the judicial reform fight. I mean, it really did look like the government was under significant strain. I know that there are new political initiatives underway right now that are kind of in that vein, but maybe not as controversial. Either that, or maybe Israel is just growing exhausted by the ongoing domestic turmoil that has that we've been watching alongside the military turmoil and the trauma. So where are we right now in the wider scheme of things as Israel wrestles with ways to stabilize its political system or to reform elements of it?
Well, you have to remember, we've now entered most likely the election year. Technically, the elections are supposed to be in late 2026, but they're almost certainly and always have been pulled a little bit forward. So we're within the next 6 to 12 months, we're probably looking at elections. And so you have to see everything through that vein. Now, if basically the current issue, or perhaps the big issue that's going to be on the table, is the question of the Haredi draft. Right, is the fact that the reserve soldiers have given and given and given, and they simply can't give anymore. We need more soldiers. If October 7th proved anything, it's that our dependence on high tech, was overrated. You need warm bodies on the border. There's simply no way to get around that. And for that, we simply need more soldiers. And those soldiers can be either really one or two categories. Either they can be women who receive exemptions they can be religious women who up until now receive exemptions, or they can be Haredim, right? It's a numbers game. You need the numbers. They have to come from somewhere. And the religious Zionists, again, who are critical, the kingmakers in any potential future government, are extremely angry about the fact that the current government has basically kicked the can down the road and refused to create effective reform and start drafting the Haredim. That was the number one issue on the table. You then saw the return of the judicial review. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. There are many deep questions that are still open within the Israeli society. Should we have a constitution? Should we not? What is the correct balance of powers? Right? We have the strongest court in the world. Definitely needs to be checked. The question is how and when. But nonetheless, the fact that the judicial review has surfaced again as we enter the election year is not incidental, right? The issue, there's only the next elections could be a referendum on one of three issues. One is the failure of October 7th, which obviously the current government is not interested in a referendum on that. The second is on the question of drafting Haredim, again, that votes out the current government, or on judicial reform, or the need to check the court in some way. There, the current government could cobble together a majority. And so they're pushing that issue as much as they possibly can in hopes that that will be the top of the agenda for the next election. And that is, at this point, their main hope for re-election, just to kind of shift the public focus. So, yes, that's...
So it sounds like a consequential year here in Israeli politics, and obviously also on the economic front. We're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Rachel Gur, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Pleasure. Have a great day.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. I teamed up with FDD's Turkey expert, Sinan Jidi, on a piece in Newsweek arguing that Washington should deny Ankara's request to purchase spare American military equipment. We should also not sell Turkey the F-35. We really delude ourselves into thinking Turkey is a reliable ally simply because it is a NATO member. Until Erdogan ceases his support for terrorist groups and stops acting counter to American interests across the East Med, he should be left out in the cold. FDD's Iran experts, Andrea Stricker and Behnam Ben Talablu, joined our communications team for a timely discussion on the ongoing U.S.-Iran nuclear talks. It's everything you wanted to know about Iranian proliferation efforts, but maybe you were too afraid to ask. These two are among the best and brightest in the business, Behnam and Andrea. I highly recommend that you check out the conversation on FDD's YouTube channel. Finally, FDD's Bridget Toomey authored a policy brief for FDD's website on U.S. sanctions targeting the Houthis' banking sector. She notes that the Iranian proxy is feeling the heat right now and that Washington should press the international community, especially the SWIFT banking network, to disconnect the group's financial assets. That's an important step. It's a big one. That's all we got for today, folks. Get smarter on foreign policy by reading us on X, watching us on YouTube and Instagram, and of course, reading our website. Please support our mission by making a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Monday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Our guest will be Batya Ungar-Sargon, an author and columnist for the Free Press. We're going to talk to her about Foreign Policy Division's in the White House and whether there is a Trump doctrine. Interesting stuff, so please do tune in. Now's the moment where I tell you to have a great weekend, so please do. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.